The ground shook before Owen Blake could reach the trench. Plasma rounds screamed overhead, punching through the prefab walls of Forward Station Orion as if they were made of paper. Blake dropped flat, dragging Private Leon Hurst down with him, and pressed his back against the dirt. Smoke already filled the air. The station's secondary generator had been hit, and half the lights were dead. Contact on the North Ridge. Lieutenant Kara Doyle's voice crackled over the comms. Vorak advanced scouts. At least 40. They're pushing hard. Blake pulled himself up to the lip of the trench and looked out across the valley. The night below flickered orange and white with weapons fire. 40 Vorak soldiers, 7 feet tall, covered in natural armor plating, advanced toward the station in perfect formation. Each one carried a pulse rifle capable of punching through 2 inches of steel. They moved without hesitation, without fear. They had never needed either. Blake had read the reports. The Vorak outer forces had swept through the Pellery system in 11 days. The Dinari had surrendered in 4. The Solan hadn't even managed to fire back before their council signed a submission agreement. "Nina, tell me you have eyes on the ridge," Blake said into the comm. "I have eyes," Nina Cross replied calmly from the elevated sniper post above the eastern wall. 43 confirmed. No heavy support. Looks like a probe. Blake almost laughed. A probe, with 43 armored shock troops. Hold fire until they cross the marker stones. Silence followed on the channel. Leon, crouched beside him, quietly loaded a second charge into his launcher without saying a word. That was what Blake liked about Leon. The man never panicked. He just loaded things. The Vorak moved closer. Their formation remained perfect, disciplined, precise, exactly as the tactical files described. They expected resistance to collapse at a certain point. What the Vorak military called the break threshold. Every species they had encountered had one. The moment when fear overwhelmed training, when soldiers ran or surrendered. The Vorak had built their entire strategy around it. 20 meters from the marker stones. Blake exhaled slowly. Fire! The eastern wall erupted with light. Nina's shot struck the lead Vorak exactly where a Pellery defector had told human intelligence 2 years earlier, between the chest plate and shoulder armor. The alien dropped before it could raise a weapon. Leon fired next. His launcher round slammed into the tight center of the formation, scattering 4 Vorak soldiers sideways in a violent blast. On the western flank, Kara led a fire team up the ridge and opened fire on the scouts trying to circle around. It wasn't a perfect defense. 2 human soldiers took hits in the first exchange. The station's northern wall suffered heavy damage. But the Vorak formation broke. Not a retreat. But they stopped advancing. The remaining scouts pulled back 40 meters, regrouping in the dark. Blake watched through his scope as they retrieved their wounded and withdrew with mechanical precision. That had never happened before. Not in any engagement report he had ever read. Their movements remained controlled, disciplined, but there was something different now. Something Blake recognized. Not panic. Not confusion. Recalculation. They were sending data. Reporting to someone higher up about what had just happened at a small, barely staffed forward station on a world the Vorak hadn't even bothered to name on their star charts. Blake lowered his scope. Kara jogged over, her helmet visor cracked and a burn mark across the shoulder of her jacket. She studied him for a moment before speaking. "They'll come back." "They will," Blake said. "With more." "Yes." She looked out at the dark valley where the scouts had vanished. "How much more?" Blake didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked around the trench. Leon calmly reloading. Nina climbing down from her sniper post. 6 soldiers along the wall checking their weapons and patching their wounds without being told. No one was shaking. No one was asking to fall back. That was the thing the Vorak didn't understand yet. Every species they had fought had a break threshold, a point where survival instincts overrode everything else. The Vorak were patient enough to wait for that moment. Experienced enough to push exactly to the edge of it. Then let biology do the rest. But they had never encountered a species where the equation worked differently. Where soldiers, when cornered, when outgunned, when facing something larger and stronger than anything their evolution had prepared them for, didn't panic. They became quieter, more focused, more dangerous. Blake thought about the reports from the outer colonies. 3 Vorak advance encounters in the past 8 months. All repelled. Not by superior firepower. Not by better technology. By humans who simply did not break when they were supposed to. He imagined what the Vorak High Command must be thinking right now. Reading those reports. Adjusting their models. Rewriting their predictions. Then he thought about something else. The Krath. Every galactic intelligence briefing for the past 3 years had mentioned them in the same tone. Hushed, careful. The Krath were the Vorak's finest soldiers. Not scouts. Not occupation forces. They were deployed only when a species required complete and total subjugation. They had ended civilizations that possessed starships. They had crushed armies 10 times larger than anything humanity could field. And they had never failed. Kara was still watching him. How much more? She asked again. Blake put his helmet back on and stared out into the dark valley. More than we've seen before, he said quietly. Get some sleep. We've got about 6 hours. At 3:40 hours, the first transport craft dropped out of fold space. Admiral George Wren was already awake when the proximity alert flashed across his screen. He stood on the observation deck of the defense cruiser Endurance as the tactical display began filling in. 1 transport became 4. 4 became 12. The ships were massive, larger than any Vorak vessel humanity had catalogued. Dark hulls. No identification signals. No communication pings. No standard arrival protocol. They didn't slow. They didn't scan. They simply arrived, oriented toward the planet below, and began their descent. Wren had been briefed on these craft twice. Both times, the intelligence officer had finished the presentation and gone silent for a long moment before saying, "These are not soldiers in the way we use that word. The Krath were engineered, not evolved. For 400 years the Vorak had designed them, selecting, modifying, rebuilding, and testing them against the hardest challenges in the galaxy. Discarding what failed. Refining what survived. The result barely resembled the original species they had been created from. 8 feet tall. Bone-dense muscle layered over skeleton capable of absorbing impacts that would instantly kill most living beings. Reaction times faster than human nerve signals could match. And beyond all of that, their psychology had been rewritten. They felt no hesitation, no fear, no instinct for self-preservation in the normal sense. The Krath did not weigh danger against survival. The concept simply didn't exist in their minds. Wren had asked the intelligence officer what that meant in practical terms. The officer had answered quietly, "It means, Admiral, that when they land, they will not stop." The intelligence officer had said only one thing about them: they don't stop. Now 12 transports were burning through the atmosphere toward Forward Station Orion and the valley surrounding it. Admiral George Wren watched from orbit. And he knew exactly what that meant. Wren had 6 cruisers, a handful of fighters, and whatever Owen Blake had on the ground. He keyed the fleet channel. "All ships, this is Wren. Hold formation. Do not engage the transports in atmosphere. If we hit them now, debris will fall over the colony zones. Wait for ground contact. Once the enemy commits, we support Blake's team with everything we have." A voice responded immediately. It was Lieutenant Commander Sam Archer aboard the frigate Caldwell. "Admiral, there are 12 transports. Each one carries roughly 200 Krath." Wren nodded slowly. "I can count, Sam. That's 2,400 ground troops, against a forward station team of 41. "I know." Silence fell across the fleet channel. Wren watched the transports descend like dark comets streaking toward the planet. "Blake knows too," he said quietly. "Trust the ground team." Owen Blake was watching the same sky. The contrails appeared before the ships themselves, long white scars cutting through the darkness. Orderly, parallel, purposeful. He counted them. 12. 40 minutes earlier, an emergency briefing had estimated the Krath complement per transport. Blake had done the math immediately. The same math Sam Archer had just done in orbit. He had not shared the number with his team. He didn't need to. They could all see the 12 contrails. They were soldiers. They knew exactly what 12 Vorak transports meant. Instead, Blake had shared something more useful. Terrain. The valley surrounding Orion Station had 3 natural choke points. A narrow rock passage to the north. A dry riverbed running east to west that created a steep elevation break along the southern approach. And a dense equipment storage yard on the western side that forced any advance into a predictable corridor. For 3 hours Blake had been preparing. Every anti-personnel charge. Every motion sensor. Every reinforced firing position. All of it placed carefully within those 3 zones. The Krath were unstoppable in open ground. Blake had no intention of giving them open ground. The first transport landed at 4:12. Its side panels opened before the landing struts fully extended. The Krath emerged immediately. Not jogging. Not assembling. Moving. Fast. Low. Spreading into an attack pattern so fluid it looked like water pouring downhill. They wore no visible armor. They didn't need it. Their bodies were the armor. Blake watched through the perimeter cameras. For the first time that night, something cold moved through him. They were not what he had expected. He had prepared for something that looked like soldiers. What stepped out of those transports looked like something older than soldiers. Something designed for war so completely that war had become its only purpose. Leon stood beside him at the monitoring station. He watched the feed silently for 10 seconds. Then he spoke. They move like they've already won. Blake didn't look away from the screen. They always have, he said quietly. Until now. He pressed the comm channel. All teams, listen carefully. North choke point goes active in 30 seconds. Hold positions until you hear the first charge. Then execute the plan exactly. Kara's voice came first. Understood. Nina's came next, sharp and calm. Ready. The Krath advance reached the northern rock passage. Blake triggered the first charge. The explosion tore through the rock corridor. It wasn't designed to cause mass casualties. It was designed to cause confusion. Scatter the leading edge. Force a pause. Make the enemy adapt to unexpected terrain damage. For most forces, that would buy 30 seconds. Maybe a minute. The Krath paused for 4 seconds. Then they came through the rubble without breaking stride. Blake exhaled slowly. 4 seconds. He had planned for 3. North team, open fire. The firefight that followed was unlike anything Blake had experienced in 12 years of service. The Krath absorbed hits that would drop any other soldier. And kept moving. They didn't take cover the way humans did. They used terrain differently, not to hide, but to redirect. To funnel their advance. To turn Blake's choke point into something they flowed around instead of through. They were adapting. In real time. And they were doing it fast. But they weren't through yet. Because the choke point wasn't just the rocks. Behind the rubble waited Nina's team on elevated ground armed with incendiary weapons. Behind Nina stood the second line. Leon and 6 soldiers with close-range heavy weapons waiting at the mouth of the passage. And buried beneath the floor of the corridor, hidden in a pattern that matched no known human military doctrine, was the second charge sequence. The Krath cleared the rocks and hit the incendiary line. 3 fell immediately. 2 staggered. The rest kept coming. They slammed into Leon's position. And the second charges detonated. Not all at once. One after another. Each blast cutting off another escape route. Each explosion tightening the corridor. Funneling the Krath into a smaller and smaller kill zone. Where Leon's team waited with everything they had. The fighting was brutal. It cost Blake 4 soldiers in the northern passage alone. But when the smoke cleared, the Krath in that corridor had been reduced from 62 to 11. And those 11 still tried to push forward until their bodies physically failed. 11 out of 62. From orbit, Admiral Wren watched the combat feed. His voice came across the comms, quiet with disbelief. Blake, they've never taken losses like that before. Not anywhere on record. Blake wiped blood from a cut above his eye. Then he looked at the tactical display. 11 transports worth of Krath were still advancing from 3 directions. "We've barely started," he said. The eastern approach was where the defense almost broke. The Krath advancing through the dry riverbed did something Blake hadn't predicted. He had studied every engagement record, every fragment of Vorak tactical doctrine. For the first 4 minutes, the Krath behaved exactly as expected. Then they changed. The column split. Not into 2 groups. Not into 3. Into 9. 9 separate streams of soldiers flowed through the gullies and rock formations of the riverbed like water. Each stream small enough to avoid concentrated fire. Each stream angling toward a different point of the eastern wall. No species the Vorak had sent the Krath against had ever documented behavior like this. Possibly because no species had survived long enough for the Krath to adapt. Kara saw it first. Owen. He was already watching. 9 converging attack streams. His eastern defenses were designed for 2. Maybe 3. 7 of those streams would reach the wall unopposed. He had 40 seconds. Nina, pull your team off the elevated post. Move to the interior yard. Kara, collapse the eastern line to the secondary barrier. Everyone else close the gaps. Now. No arguments. No hesitation. The teams moved instantly. The Krath tactic, splitting into 9 streams, was designed to overwhelm a static defense. But the defense they were about to hit wasn't static. It had been moving for the last 35 seconds. Rearranging. Becoming something their pattern recognition hadn't predicted. The first stream reached the eastern wall. And found nobody there. They vaulted over the barrier. And landed directly inside the interior yard. Inside Nina's repositioned firing zone. An open space. No cover. The fight lasted 11 seconds. 3 humans were wounded. 14 Krath never stood back up. The second stream arrived 2 minutes later. This time they hit the secondary barrier. Fully manned. Braced. Ready. The fighting there wasn't ranged combat. It was close. Brutal. Soldiers holding the line with strength and will as much as weapons. Blake sent 2 reserves to reinforce the position. The line held. Barely. The 7th and 8th streams struck the southeastern corner at the same time, exactly where Blake feared they would. The corner was lightly defended. There simply hadn't been enough people to cover everything. 3 Krath broke through the perimeter. They were inside the station. Leon found them. Blake did not see what happened in the next 90 seconds. He was managing 3 other crises at the same time. But when it was over, Leon returned to the main defense position with a badly damaged arm. He said nothing about what had happened. He simply picked up his weapon with his good hand and asked where he was needed next. Blake looked at him for a moment. "Your arm?" "It's still there," Leon replied calmly. "Where do you need me?" Blake pointed toward the eastern wall. Leon nodded and moved. The Krath had expected the eastern wall to be empty by the time their 9th attack stream arrived. Their tactical model predicted that 8 simultaneous breaches would draw every defender away from the center. The 9th stream, largest of them all, nearly 120 soldiers, hit the eastern wall at full speed. They expected an open corridor into the heart of the station. Instead, they found every mine Blake had kept in reserve. The mines had been laid in the 60 seconds between the 8th and 9th attack streams arriving, placed in a pattern that existed in no military doctrine. Because Blake had invented it 4 minutes earlier. He had drawn the pattern in his mind, calculating where the 9th stream would move if their objective was the station's power core. The detonation sequence lasted 8 seconds. 8 thunderous seconds. When the explosions stopped, the 9th stream had only 12 soldiers left standing. They didn't retreat. They pushed forward through the debris, single file, relentless. Blake's team met them in the interior corridor. And stopped them there. After that, the eastern approach went quiet. High above the planet, Admiral Wren watched the engagement unfold with 3 senior officers gathered around the tactical display. No one spoke. The numbers were extraordinary. Not just the Krath casualty rate, which had no precedent in Vorak records, but the pattern of the human defense. Again and again, The defenders were doing something the Vorak tactical database had no word for. They simply weren't where the Krath expected them to be. Not because of speed. Not because of superior numbers. Not because of better technology. Because they were thinking. The Krath were designed to defeat strength. They were designed to outlast endurance. They were designed to overwhelm every known defense pattern recorded across hundreds of conquered species. But the Vorak catalog did not include a species that reacted to overwhelming force by becoming more creative in real time, more adaptive, and, most puzzling of all, more engaged. The humans on the ground were not fighting like they were losing. They were fighting like the problem was interesting. Wren's senior tactical officer, Helen Graff, leaned closer to the display. "They're using a section of the Western storage yard as a redirect channel," she said. "That wasn't in the defense plan I reviewed an hour ago." "It wasn't in any plan," Wren replied. "Blake improvised it." Helen looked at him. "In the middle of a Krath assault?" "Apparently." On the ground, Blake stood at the entrance to the Western storage yard, watching the enemy's third major push funnel into the redirect channel exactly as he had hoped. The channel was a narrow gap between two rows of heavy storage containers. Wide enough for 3 Krath soldiers to move side by side. Long enough that once someone entered it, turning back would be difficult. What waited at the far end of the channel was Lieutenant Cara Doyle. And 8 exhausted soldiers. And the last operational heavy weapon. Blake pressed the comm. "Ready." Cara answered instantly. "Born ready." She paused. Actually, extremely tired. But operationally ready. Blake almost laughed. It came out wrong, half a sound, because his ribs were bruised from an explosion 40 minutes earlier. But the laugh escaped anyway. The Krath entered the channel. Cara's team opened fire. When the smoke cleared, Blake reviewed the numbers. Third push repelled. Western storage clear. Perimeter holding. For the first time in hours, he allowed himself 30 seconds of silence. He looked at what remained of his team. 26 soldiers. Several injured. All still fighting. All still watching the perimeter. No one had broken. They were exhausted. They were wounded. But they were still here. Blake keyed the fleet channel. "Wren. 3 pushes repelled. Perimeter holding. What do you see from up there?" Wren answered carefully. "The Krath are regrouping. All remaining forces." He paused. "Blake, that will be a 4th push. With everything they have left." "They've never done a 4th push," Wren added quietly. "They've never needed one." Blake looked at his 26 soldiers. "Good," he said. "We'll be ready." The 4th push came at dawn. Blake hadn't slept. He doubted anyone had. The sky was slowly turning pale grey, the dull, lifeless morning of this world. It wasn't beautiful. It simply meant visibility. And visibility meant you could see the enemy coming. Which was not comforting. They came from 3 directions. Not 9 streams. No feints. No tactical tricks. Just raw force. Blake estimated just under 900 Krath soldiers still operational. They moved in 3 massive columns. Fast. Direct. The message was simple. "We have enough. We are coming through you." Blake had 23 soldiers capable of holding weapons. 3 more were injured but still standing. Nina had a broken hand. Leon's arm was worse than he admitted. Paul Garrett had taken a hit to the knee and could barely move. They were all at their posts anyway. Blake studied the perimeter feeds. No mines left. Only 1 heavy weapon, Cara's, still operational. The north and eastern walls were badly damaged. The station's power was running on emergency reserves. 23 soldiers. 1 heavy weapon. A ruined station. But Blake had something else. He spent 5 minutes on the comm channel with Sam Archer aboard the Caldwell. Wren listened silently. What Blake described wasn't a defense plan. It was something else. A carefully staged collapse. A sequence of events designed to look like failure. Sam Archer asked 3 sharp questions. Wren said nothing until Blake finished. Then the Admiral spoke. "That is either brilliant or catastrophic." "Could be both," Blake replied. Understood, Wren said. We'll be ready. At 6:11, the Krath columns reached the station. The northern and eastern walls collapsed almost immediately. The defenders appeared to retreat in disorder. The Krath poured through the breaches. 2 columns surged into the station interior. Numbers overwhelming. Unstoppable. Until they reached the center of the compound. And stopped. The compound was empty. Not abandoned. Prepared. Containers had been moved. Cables stretched across the ground in deliberate patterns. And standing alone in the center was Owen Blake. No cover. No protection. Just watching them. The Krath halted 15 meters away. For a fraction of a second. They hesitated. Not fear. They did not possess fear. Something else. Something new. Something their design had never encountered before. Uncertainty. Blake pressed a trigger in his left hand. Every light in the station activated at once. Floodlights. Landing beacons. Emergency work lights. Everything powered by the reserve grid. All aimed inward. The compound exploded with blinding light. The Krath visual systems, optimized for combat, were overwhelmed. The effect lasted 4 seconds. 4 seconds was all Blake needed. Above the atmosphere, the frigate Caldwell dove dangerously low. A maneuver Sam Archer would probably have to explain later. 2 precision support strikes slammed into the ground 60 meters outside the station perimeter. Not inside the compound. Not near the defenders. Between the 3rd Krath column and the 2 columns already inside. The explosion split the enemy force. 900 soldiers became 2 separate groups. Roughly 600 were already trapped inside the container ring. The containers the Krath had ignored as harmless storage equipment now formed a broken circle. Inside that circle, from the gaps between containers, from elevated stacks, from every hidden position, Blake's 23 soldiers opened fire inward. They weren't trying to destroy 600 Krath. That wasn't the plan. The plan was to hold them there. Long enough. The fighting inside the compound was brutal. 7 soldiers fell in the first 3 minutes. Nina fired one-handed without complaint. Paul Garrett physically held a gap between containers when his weapon failed, buying precious seconds until Leon reached him with another rifle. From orbit, Wren coordinated support strikes while tracking Blake's shifting position. The other 5 cruisers watched the Vorak fleet carefully. No reinforcements arrived. The Vorak fleet had pulled back to observation distance. They weren't intervening. They were watching, waiting to see what would happen. 12 minutes into the battle, the Krath inside the compound began to withdraw. Not panic. Not retreat. A calculated withdrawal. They had taken losses beyond their predicted parameters. Their only logical action was to leave. Blake's soldiers did not pursue. They held the compound. They held the perimeter. They let the Krath withdraw. Wren launched 2 final strikes into the northern field. Blake fired 3 signal flares into the sky, exactly as he and Sam Archer had planned. The 3rd Krath column stopped. The signals were clear. The cost of continuing the assault was now mathematically unacceptable. For the first time in 400 years of Vorak military history, a Krath assault force withdrew from an unfinished engagement. They didn't run. They marched away in perfect formation. Because the Krath did not understand defeat. But they did understand mathematics. Blake stood in the ruined compound and watched the enemy through his scope. His hands were steady. Only now did he realize how much blood had soaked into his jacket. He noticed it the way a man notices rain, present, real, but not especially relevant to the moment. He pressed the fleet channel. Wren, they're pulling back. There was silence for a moment. Then Wren's voice came through, quiet and measured. I see it. A pause. Have they ever done that before? No, Wren answered a second later. They haven't. Blake lowered his scope. Around the compound, his soldiers were already moving, checking the wounded, securing positions, making sure nothing unexpected followed the withdrawal. No one cheered. No one celebrated. They looked like people who were very tired, and only beginning to understand what had just happened. What are the Vorak doing? Blake asked. Ren took a moment before answering. They haven't moved. Blake nodded to himself. Yes, that was exactly what he expected. They would watch. That was the part that mattered. The Vorak fleet remained at observation distance for 6 hours. Ren did not lower the alert level. His 6 cruisers held their orbital positions, shields up, weapons ready, watching the Vorak flotilla with the calm patience of people who had recently learned how quickly things could change. No one stood down. The crews stayed at their stations. They drank coffee, monitored sensors, and watched the tactical displays without blinking. On the ground, Blake's team spent those 6 hours doing what soldiers always do after a battle. They treated the wounded. They secured the perimeter. And they counted the dead. 17 soldiers had fallen. 17 out of 41 who had defended the station through the night. Each name went into Blake's personal record carefully. He did not rush that part. At 8 o'clock, Sam Archer landed a medical shuttle in the station yard. The first thing off the shuttle was a trauma team. The second thing was a replacement rifle for Leon. Leon accepted it with his good hand and said, "Thank you," with the seriousness of a man receiving something sacred. His arm had been set and braced. He stayed on the perimeter anyway. Nina's broken hand had been wrapped. She climbed back to her elevated sniper post. At 11:47, the Vorak fleet moved. Ren's voice came over the command channel, clear and precise. They are repositioning. Not an attack vector. A pause. They're moving to formal communication distance. Standard Vorak diplomatic range. Blake sat on an equipment crate while a field medic worked painfully on his ribs. "They want to talk," he said. "Appears so," Ren replied. Then Ren added something interesting. "The Krath transports are still on the ground. The soldiers who withdrew haven't re-embarked." Blake nodded slowly. "I know." "What do you mean, you know?" Blake thought about it. He had been turning the idea over in his mind for hours. The Vorak had sent the Krath. Their finest soldiers. Their absolute best. And the Krath had failed. Not completely. At least not by simple military standards. They had killed 17 human soldiers and destroyed much of a small forward station. On paper, that might even count as success. But the Krath had not completed their objective. And they had suffered losses with no precedent in 400 years of Vorak military history. The Vorak were not reckless conquerors. They were calculators. They had expanded across 60 star systems through careful threat analysis. They measured the cost of conquering a species against the value of controlling it. They sent the Krath only when the calculation was simple. When resistance would exist, but remain manageable. They had sent the Krath here because the math looked easy. "They're updating their model," Blake said. "The Krath haven't left because the Vorak want them to see this too." "See what?" Ren asked. Blake looked around the ruined compound. The blast scars. The broken walls. The 17 empty places where soldiers had stood that morning. And the survivors, exhausted, wounded, but still working. Still holding the line. "It means the math changed," Blake said. At 12:03, a communication request arrived on the standard Vorak diplomatic frequency. Ren routed it to the surface. Blake was the senior ground commander. And the ground was where this had happened. The message arrived in text format. Written in the common trade language humanity had spent 8 years learning from species already absorbed by the Vorak Empire. The message read, "Convey to your ground commander. The Krath have not failed in this manner before. We observe that this outcome is not explained by your weapons or fortifications. We request an accounting." Blake read it twice. They wanted an explanation. They wanted to know why. He composed his reply carefully. Every word mattered. What he wrote would be read by the military analysts of a 60-system empire. It would also be read by the Krath soldiers still waiting on the planet below. And by intelligence services across dozens of conquered species. He wrote, "We did not win because our weapons are stronger or our soldiers larger. We won because our soldiers chose to be here. Every weapon, every fortification, every tactic works better when the person using it has decided for themselves that this is the line they will hold. You cannot engineer that. You cannot design it into a soldier. It must be chosen. That is what the Krath encountered here. Not equipment. Choice. He sent the message. Then he waited. The reply came 17 minutes later. 17 minutes was a long time for the Vorak. The response read, "We have not encountered this quality at scale within a species before. We require time to revise our assessment." That was all. Wren spoke quietly over the command channel. "Blake, do you know what that means in diplomatic terms?" "They're rerunning the math," Blake said. "Yes." Wren looked out toward the Vorak fleet. "They're recalculating whether the cost of continuing this war is worth it." Blake looked up at the sky. The Vorak fleet held position. The Krath transports remained on the ground. The human cruisers stayed in orbit. Everyone was waiting. "We give them time to calculate," Blake said. "And while they do, we build. We reinforce every colony on the outer frontier. We deploy more ships. We make the math harder every single day, until the answer becomes impossible." Wren was quiet. "And if it doesn't?" Blake looked across the ruined station. "Then we hold the next station too." 3 days later, the Vorak fleet withdrew from the system. The Krath transports lifted from the surface before dawn. They departed in perfect formation, silent, precise, and without communication. No treaty was signed. No surrender was offered. No formal agreement was made. The Vorak simply left. On the observation deck of the cruiser Endurance, Helen Graff watched the final transport disappear into fold space. She turned to Admiral Wren. "Is it over?" Wren looked at the empty stars for a long moment. Then he answered quietly, "No." He paused. "But now they know something they didn't before." Helen glanced at him. "What's that?" Wren folded his hands behind his back. "That humans don't break." "Is it over?" Helen asked. "No," Wren said quietly. "It's beginning." What he meant was simple and enormous at the same time. There would be more encounters. More stations like Orion. More decisions made on worlds humanity had only just begun to reach. The Vorak would revise their model. They would return. And next time, they would come with a different strategy. The galaxy had noticed what happened in that valley. And attention in the galaxy always carried consequences. Some welcome, some not. Wren meant all of that. But he also meant something else. Something he didn't say out loud. Because it was the kind of truth that sounded too large when spoken. For 60 years, the Vorak Empire had expanded across the stars. In that time they had encountered species stronger than humans. Species faster. Species better armed. Species more numerous. Older civilizations. More advanced civilizations. They had fought enemies with better weapons, stronger ships, and superior biology. They had defeated all of them. But they had never encountered a species that answered the arrival of the Krath with what Owen Blake's team showed in the dirt of that valley. It wasn't courage. Courage existed in the Vorak catalogue. Courage was predictable. Courage could be broken. This was something else. Something that had no entry in their records. Something that looked different every time it appeared. It looked like Leon reloading a weapon with a broken arm. It looked like Nina climbing back to her sniper post using only one hand. It looked like Kara making a dry joke in the middle of a battlefield. It looked like Owen Blake standing alone in an empty compound, holding a trigger and trusting that his soldiers would be exactly where they chose to be. It looked like choice. The kind of choice that appears when a species decides something is worth defending. Not because someone above them calculated the odds, but because each person looked at the line in front of them and decided for themselves. This is the line. The Vorak had sent their fiercest soldiers. And for the first time in 400 years, those soldiers had returned without victory. Across 60 star systems, in briefing rooms, tactical centers, and quiet conversations among species that had once surrendered because the math said they must. Something had shifted. Something was watching. Something was beginning to wonder whether the math might work differently after all.